Hey everyone, today we are going to be talking all about two indie eyeshadow palettes that will be launching this Friday. And this feels like a really big week when it comes to indie makeup. I feel like we've had a little bit of a lull, but we are back in full swing and I'm really excited about these palettes because these brands also haven't had a launch in some time. I've got Book of Chromes Volume 3 from Dede Signature and the Huldra from Singe Beauty. I'm going to do detailed swatches and 2 looks with each palette. Let's go ahead and get into it. This is the Huldra palette from Singe Beauty. Really love the artwork on this one and the kind of chrome detailing. And inside we have a 20 pan palette with 12 mattes and 8 shimmers. This is such a gorgeous color story and I can already tell that people are really excited about this one. This is basically what I would consider to be kind of a half neutral, half colorful palette. I believe it's going to be retailing for $51. I don't believe there's discount affiliate codes, but I will have it linked in YouTube shopping and down below. I do make a small commission if you use those links, but if you find my video helpful and you decide to use them, thank you so much. It really does help my channel. I have to say that I am very impressed at the price point on this palette. That is something I know is very important to Agnieszka, the owner of the brand. And I love the fact that even though the palette isn't stacked with chrome shimmers, the shimmers in here feel special. They feel sparkly. The textures are approachable, easy to work with, and as you can see when I'm swatching them, a lot of them have really beautiful multicolored sparkles in them, just gives them a little bit of extra dimension. And here is what the whole palette looks like swatched to my arm. You get a great array of mattes from light to deep, and I love how cohesive this color story is. I also want to mention there are lashes that are coming out with this palette. I am not someone who regularly wears false lashes, but you can bet I'm going to be playing around with them and I'll let you know my thoughts in some of my other videos. The second palette we're going to be doing a bit of a deep dive on is the palette from Dede Signature. This is the third iteration of a palette like this. As you can see, you have a very heavy shimmer ratio. This type of palette is great for pulling in to use with some of your other matte shades. You get a total of 12 pans of shimmers, and as you can see, some of these pans are split pans. You also get 3 matte shades, and something I know is very important to Dede, which she told me because I met her at an event, is that it's been very important to try to keep the prices of the palettes down. So even with this very shimmer heavy palette, it retails for $68 and you can use a discount affiliate code to get 10% off. I'm going to put mine up on the screen now. And that is pricey, of course, still, but I will say that considering you get so many shimmers in this palette, I do think that price point is fair. And as you can see, you have a nice array of lighter shimmers to deeper shimmers, neutral shimmers to more colorful ones. I particularly like these deep and moody ones that I'm swatching now. One other thing I want to mention is that there will be a shimmer primer that will be launching alongside of the palette. I'm not sure what the price point of that is, but I will be using it in my looks. Let's go ahead and get into using these palettes on the eyes. All right, let's go ahead and dive into doing some looks. I'm going to start off with the Huldra palette. I'm going to do 2 looks with each palette, 1 on each eye. And I didn't put my blush on purpose because I just really am tempted to use this kind of deep plum purple toned shade as a blush. Although I know I'm going to have to go in with an incredibly light hand because it looks like it's super pigmented. But something just tells me that it's going to make such a pretty blush shade on medium to deeper skin tones. All right, I am glad that I went in with a lighter hand. But that is a beautiful shade. And I think I can add just maybe a tiny bit extra without going overboard. By the way, this is one of the brushes from Fantasy Cosmetica. I particularly like this smaller blush brush because I feel like I can get a little bit more of a precise application. All right, and here is what the shade Shapeshifter looks like applied as blush. I absolutely love using that on the face. For the first look, I want to do something that's kind of green purple. I'm going to start off with this shade Guardian, and I'm just going to pop that on the inner portion of the lid. I don't have a primer down right now, so how you're seeing these shadows apply is how they apply on my bare skin. Something that I am really happy to see is the range in depths in the mattes. We have some light mattes, we have some really deep mattes. I think in general that's been one of my biggest issues with grungy green palettes is that I often find that there isn't quite enough depth for my liking, and I have to say that is not the case here. The other thing that I find with a lot of grungy green palettes is that they have just brown shades to deepen up the outer corner. Again, I love that we have some plum shades as well and some deeper green shades. Already loving that so far. I'm going to take a little bit of Guardian on a smaller brush and add it to the corresponding area of the lower lash line. And I do want to do something that is sort of green and purple, so I'm going to dip into this shade Bad Luck, which is one of the sort of lighter toned purple shades in the palette, although this shade still has a good amount of depth. But I'm just going to use that to blend it into those deeper purples. So far, I am having a great time using these mattes. They are building easily, but they're not full pigmentation on the first dip into the pan, which I do appreciate. Now I'm going to dip into Shapeshifter again and just build up that outer corner because I do want that outer corner to have a good amount of depth. Even though this is a super deep matte, it's not full pigmentation on the first dip into the pan. And then I'm just using my fluffier brush to diffuse that shade Shapeshifter a little bit more. I'm going to take a little bit on this smaller brush and work that down onto the lower lash line. And now I'm just taking a little bit of that lighter shade Bad Luck and I'm softening up around the edges. And then I'm going to take Bad Luck again and place a little bit along the lower lash line to blend Shapeshifter into the blush, which is also Shapeshifter. I do want to use a lighter matte as well. I'm going to go in with Secret, which is not quite a pastel green, but is clearly a lighter tone green. I want to place that under the brow bone just to add a little bit of brightness. I'm adding a little bit of the shimmer primer from Clionadh in Bad to the Brow. And now we're going to dip into the shimmers. I always have a hard time deciding, but I was really drawn to this shade Huldra, which I think is a duochrome, and it has really pretty multicolored sparkles in it. And I'm going to start off by putting that on the inner portion of the lid. And then I want to use this blue-purple duochrome called Temptress. Here's what it looks like on my fingertip. I'm just going to show you a swatch. Ooh, yeah. Beautiful. And I am going to add that to blend into that deeper plum tone outer corner. And I do feel like either one of those shimmers could have been worn by itself, but I couldn't decide which, so I did them together. And for the brow bone highlight, I think I'm going to use this goldy green shade. It's called Seducing. And I'm going to pop that on the brow bone. And a little bit of that same shade on the inner corner as well. And I do want to do a little bit of a face highlight. I'm going to use that same kind of purple blue duochrome and just sheer it out as a little bit of a cheek highlight, because I think that paired with that shade that I used as a blush, that will go quite well. All right, I added some liner and mascara, and here is my first completed look. All right, for my second look, I really wanted to play around with these neutral tones, and the inspiration behind that is this brown shimmer, because you don't often get just a good solid brown shimmer. I often have people asking me which brown shimmers I recommend. I don't have that many. I'm going to start off with Soul Searcher and use that as my transition shade. Pop it into the crease. And then I'm just going to place a little bit along the lower lash line as well. I'm going to start to build up some depth with this brown matte here called Tail. And I'm just going to start to deepen up the outer corner a little bit. There are some great deeper brown mattes in here. There's like a few that kind of are a plummy brown that I think I'm going to use to deepen up the outer corner, really smoke it out. And then a little bit along the lower lash line as well. All right, now I'm going to dip into Oden, which is in the lower row. This one actually has just a little bit of green to it. There's some good grungy mattes in this palette, and just really start to build up that outer corner. I have to say, I really do think that these mattes are what I would consider to be beginner friendly. And they can be worn either like as a light wash or really built up if you want. And just add a little bit to the lower lash line as well. And in the outermost corner, I'm going to use the deepest matte in the palette. This is Root. And I'm just going to add that. Oh yeah. That is exactly the kind of smokiness that I wanted. I feel like I don't do neutral eye looks very often because I am so drawn to color, but I do like that you have some great options for a neutral look in here if you want. I feel like the neutral lovers, you know, maybe that just want to like dip their toes into color, this may be a good option. I'm not saying this is a neutral palette by any means, but hey, if you like neutral with some color, you do have the option of doing some neutral looks with this one. And I'm just going to soften the outer corner with one of the lighter brown tone mattes. I actually did get a little bit of fallout with that deepest matte tone there, but I cleaned it up a little bit with concealer. So keep that in mind if you have your base done first. Add a little bit of that same shimmer enhancer. Can't wait to dip into the shimmers. I'm going to use the iridescent in the palette too as my highlighting shade. As my lid shade, I'm going to go in with Tree Trunk, which is that brown shimmer that I told you I was excited to use. I'm going to swatch that on the back of my hand just so you can see it. And that's also a shade that I would totally use as a day-to-day one and done shadow. I'm basically just putting that all over the lid. Now I am so excited to dip into this iridescent here. This is like a green gold iridescent. Let me swatch it. Here is what it looks like. And I think that that is just going to add an extra special pop to this look. I'm just going to add it as an inner corner and then sweep it up. And I'm going to actually keep dragging it out all along the edges of that shimmer. And then I'm going to use that same shade with a lighter hand as my face highlight. There's some shimmers in here that make beautiful highlighters. And because they have a smoother texture, I do feel like they are maybe more approachable than some from other indie palettes in terms of being able to do that because the shimmers are smooth. All right, I added some liner and mascara, and here is the second completed look. All right, now that I've had a chance to do some swatches and a couple of looks with this new palette from Singe Beauty, I want to close up with some wrap-up thoughts. So I had a ton of fun using this palette. Honestly, it's going to be a very tough call to say whether this is my favorite palette from the brand because previously it was Succulent Dew. I'm not sure if it kind of displaces Succulent Dew. They're very, very different palettes. However, I do think that in terms of, you know, the amount of like day-to-day looks that I'm going to use them for, I think this one will be a little bit more of a staple palette because you have some color, but you also have some neutral tones. And, you know, I think that in terms of the performance of the palette, this is very similar to the quality that I know and have really been enjoying from Singe. Something that you can really depend on in terms of the formula is you're going to have really buildable mattes. So mattes that you have control over the pigmentation. They're not going to be full pigment on first application. Really do appreciate that. I love a buildable matte. I didn't find them patchy whatsoever. I did like that I could use this purple toned matte shade as a blush. And as I mentioned, I really love how many deep mattes we have in this palette. That was not an issue whatsoever. So in terms of deepening up shades, transition shades, you have a great variety in here. If I could change anything, I would have maybe added a purple tone shade because you have this beautiful purple shimmer here, and then of course this deep purple here. I might have added maybe like a mid-toned purple, but that's being nitpicky. In terms of the shimmers, I know that it's very important to Angelica that these shimmers be approachable to different skin types. So she has mentioned that she has issues with shimmers creasing on her. And so I do like that, you know, the shimmers in here I think are very approachable. But that being said, they're very sparkly. So even though they're approachable, you get a lot of punch with them. And they're not all multi-chromes, but regardless of if they're chrome shadows or not, they all have a beautiful twinkle and sparkle to them. And a lot of them also have multicolored sparkles, so they have a little bit of extra dimension, which I love. I love the inclusion of an iridescent. I'm going to mention it every time. Love it when a palette has an iridescent, both as a highlighting shade and inner corner shade. So absolutely love this. And this one is such a special iridescent shade, and it goes perfectly with the tones in this palette. And so, yeah, this one is a win for me, and I am super excited to play around with it more. All right, we are back, and now I'm going to dip into the Book of Chromes palette from Dede Signature. This is volume 3, so there are 2 previous versions just like this. As I mentioned, it's going to retail for $68 before using a code. And for my first look, I'm going to do something that is blue leaning. I think this palette is definitely a kind of shimmer accent palette. You can do a look with just this palette, of course, but I think this is also the type of palette that you're meant to bring in some other mattes in your collection. A lot of us eyeshadow lovers have plenty of other palettes and mattes that we enjoy using. I'm going to use this eye paint from Violette. This is my very favorite product from the brand, and this is so pigmented. It's one of my very favorite cobalt blues. And you can see I put down the smallest amount, and I'm just going to quickly blend that out. If you're using a product like this, I highly recommend doing one eye at a time because the product will dry down quickly. And then I'm just going to add a little bit more. That is messy, but it doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to be going over this matte with the shimmer. But oh my gosh, I love this blue so much. And one of the products that Dede Signature is also going to be launching is this shimmer primer. And I'm very excited for that because I really do think that indie brands do the shimmer primers the best because, I mean, they have the most intense shimmers. So when people ask me which shimmer primers to go for, I think there's no one answer to that. I really like the one from Clionadh, but Diverune has a great one. Belle Beaute Bar has a great one. And now we have this one, which I'm sure is also going to be great. All right, now I just want to use my fingers and play with some of these shimmers. So first I'm going to go into this split pan. We actually have quite a number of really beautiful blues in this palette, so can't go wrong. I'm just going to add that to the inner portion of the lid. Even that all by itself is so pretty. And now I want to use this deeper blue as well. Here's what it looks like on my fingertip. And I think what I want to do is just layer over that a little bit and blend it into that matte from Violette. Taking that first shimmer that I used and just adding it to the lower lash line, kind of on the inner portion of the lid. And then a little bit of that second blue shimmer. I am excited because there is a blue iridescent that's in that split pan as well. So I'm just going to try to pick up a little bit of that. The pan is big enough that you can get in there and just pick up one shade if you don't want to mix them together. But I'm going to put that on the brow bone. I love how quick this look was too, like super high impact, quick look. All right, and the last shimmer I think I'm going to use for this look is this first kind of blue-green shimmer here. I did swatch it on the back of my hand so that you can see. Pretty sure that's a duochrome shade. You can definitely see a green shift in it, but you can still see some blue. And so I think it's still going to be pretty cohesive. I'm just going to add that along the inner portion here. I'm just going to take a little bit of that same shade and use it as a highlight. Yeah, if you apply this sheerly, it actually looks like a really pretty kind of green-blue highlight. It is a sparkly highlight, but it applies smoothly to the skin. Here's what that looks like. I added some liner and mascara, and here is the first completed look. All right, for my second look, I want to do kind of a sultry neutral look, or at least want to use these mattes to let you know how those perform. And I do think that these mattes go really well together. So I'm going to start off with the mustard tone matte. and just put that on the inner portion of the lid. That is beautiful. I'm going to drag some along the lower lash line as well. Now I'm going to deepen up a little bit with this kind of burnt orange toned matte here called Bronze Testament. Just going to create a little bit of a transition. That is beautiful. No issues with these mattes whatsoever. They're very pigmented, but they blend out very easily. And they're building on top of each other well. In comparison to the mattes from Singe Beauty, I would say these are more pigmented, but I would say they're still approachable. And then I'm going to take a little bit of that same orange tone matte and connect to the lower lash line. Last but not least, I'm going to go in with Imperial Depth. And I want to use that shade because I do want to use some of the deeper shimmers in the palette. There's some beautiful kind of moody deep shimmers, and I want to use at least one of those in the outer corner as well. All right, so far so good. I'm just going to take a little bit and connect that to the lower lash line. And the last thing I'm going to do is just take a little bit more of that orange tone matte and blend out around the edges. Also just want there to be kind of more of a fade out into orange around that outer edge and down into my blush. All right, I'm really happy with that so far. I'm going to take a little bit of that shimmer primer from Dede Signature that is coming out with this palette and just put that all over the lid. All right, always hard to decide which shimmer to use. I'm going to use this one here in the first row called Liquid Heirloom. And it looks like it's orange in the pan, although it has a pretty strong gold shift. But I do think that will go well with some of the matte tones that I put down. I'm just going to put that on the inner portion of the lid, leaving that middle portion kind of bare. And I'm going to go into the split pan here. This is called Infernal Rain. And I want to use that more orange tone shade that's on the bottom. And I'm just going to blend that into the gold, kind of put it in the middle portion. And then in the outermost portion, I want to go in with Midnight Authority. That's this gorgeous moody shimmer. Okay, I'm going to just swatch it, but I think it has, it has orange sparkles in it. So I think that the warm tones of that sparkle will go well with the other tones. I'm just going to try to gently blend that into the deeper matte in that outermost corner. I actually really love that so far, but I am going to use a highlighting shade. Again, going to go in with this split pan. This is Molten Decree. Actually, I haven't used this shimmer yet, but it has an iridescent in there. It looks super high impact, so try to use a light hand just to put a little bit on the inner corner and put a little bit, ooh, that was heavy-handed. That's okay. Put a little bit on the brow bone, or more than a little bit. And I think that will be also a perfect highlighting shade. So I am going to use a little tiny bit on the cheekbone and just blend that out. All right, I added some liner and mascara, and here is my second completed look. Totally different vibes than the first look, but I really like that we did something very cool toned and very warm toned. All right, and now that we've had a chance to do 2 looks and some detailed swatches with the Book of Chrome's palette, Volume 3, let's close up with some wrap-up thoughts. So I, again, had a ton of fun using this palette. I think that whenever you have an all shimmer palette or a shimmer heavy palette, you know, this is definitely not going to be for everyone. However, if you're into special shimmers and you like, you know, having a palette that you can kind of pull in and use with other mattes in your collection, I think that having palettes like this is great, and I actually really love it. I love traveling with them. I love using these palettes in that way. And I really like that with this palette, you have such a nice variety of warm tones and cool tones. You have some iridescent tones in here as well. And the split pans turned out to be really great for me because there was a lot of times when I did pull in and just use half of the pan in the palette, and I didn't have any issues with doing that. I think that in terms of the price point, so this is $68 and you get 12 shimmers in here, actually more than that because of the split pans, just in terms of the variety itself. You have more than 12 shimmer shades that you can use, as well as some great mattes to pair with some of the tones in here. I do think that these mattes are going to be paired well with the warmer tones in here. I didn't have any issues, and I didn't mind pulling in other mattes to use for my looks. In terms of the quality, I think that the shimmers are great. Now that we've had a chance to play with both palettes, I would love to hear what you think. I do have some other videos like this coming in the very near future. So, you know, I've responded to feedback where you all have told me that you like seeing videos where I play with multiple looks and do multiple tutorials. If you made it to the end of the video, I would so appreciate if you would leave some type of sparkle emoji. And I hope that even if you're not in the market for picking up any new palettes, this inspired you to maybe dupe the vibes or pull out some other palettes in your collection and play with makeup. As always, I really hope you found this video helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.